No one around them noticed anything unusual at first. The street was busy in that familiar, careless way. Cars passing, footsteps echoing on the pavement, neon signs flickering above storefronts. People were lost in their own worlds, scrolling phones, talking, laughing, moving past each other without really seeing. In a place like this, nothing ever feels dangerous, until it is. She stood near the edge of the sidewalk, waiting. One hand held her phone, the other tucked into her jacket pocket. From the outside, she looked calm. Normal. Just another woman killing time in the city. But there was a quiet tension in her posture, the kind you only notice when you know what to look for. A man slowed his steps as he passed her. At first, it was subtle. A glance that lingered too long. A shift in direction that didn't quite make sense. He stopped, turned back, and closed the distance between them as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Still, no one reacted. People walked by. A couple laughed nearby. A car horn blared in the distance. Life continued, unaware that a line was about to be crossed. The man leaned closer. Too close. His voice dropped, low enough that only she could hear. Whatever he said wasn't meant to start a conversation. It was meant to test her. To see how much he could take without consequences. She stepped back. That should have been enough. It should have ended there. But instead of stopping, he smiled. Not a friendly smile. Not even a confident one. It was the kind that appears when someone believes they have power and no one is watching. A few steps away, another man observed the scene in silence. Steven Seagal stood with his hands in his pockets, posture relaxed, expression unreadable. To anyone else, he looked ordinary. No tension, no urgency, no sign that anything mattered more than the night air around him. But his eyes were fixed. He wasn't watching casually. He was measuring distance. Movement. Intent. The way the man leaned in again. The way her shoulders tightened. Steven didn't move. Not yet. Because moments like this don't explode. They creep. They test boundaries inch by inch, waiting for either fear or intervention. And the man, confident and unaware, took one more step forward. What he didn't know, what no one on that street knew, was that the woman he had chosen to target was not alone. And the man watching from a few steps away wasn't just her boyfriend. He was a martial artist who had spent a lifetime learning one simple truth. Control always comes before force. Have you ever witnessed a moment where everything looked normal, right before it wasn't? Before anything went wrong, the night felt completely ordinary. The city moved at its usual pace, fast, distracted, confident that nothing unexpected would happen. Streetlights cast long reflections on the pavement, and the hum of traffic blended with distant music from nearby cafes. People passed by in clusters and alone, some rushing home, others wandering without urgency. It was the kind of environment where danger hides easily, because everyone assumes someone else is paying attention. She had arrived a few minutes early. Standing near the storefront, she checked her phone again, not because there was a new message, but because it gave her something to focus on. Waiting in public spaces always felt a little exposed. Not frightening, just uncomfortable in a way that's hard to explain. Still, there was no reason to feel unsafe. The street was well lit. There were plenty of people around. Just another normal evening. A short distance away, Steven Seagal stood quietly, leaning back against a low railing. He wasn't trying to stay hidden, and he wasn't drawing attention either. His posture was loose, almost casual, as if he were simply enjoying the air and the rhythm of the city. To anyone passing by, he looked like an ordinary man killing time. No bodyguards, no entourage, no hint of reputation. That was intentional. Years of discipline had taught him something most people never learn. Standing out is rarely useful. Awareness, not appearance, is what keeps people safe. So he blended in, letting the noise of the city wash over him while his focus remained sharp. He watched people pass. A group of friends laughing too loudly. A couple arguing in low voices. A man on his phone, nearly walking into traffic. Nothing unusual. Nothing alarming. Just the constant, messy movement of everyday life. From time to time, Steven glanced toward her, not possessively, not anxiously, but attentively. The kind of awareness that doesn't demand control, only readiness. They had done this 100 times before. Meet somewhere public. Enjoy the night. Keep things simple. Most people believe danger announces itself. That it arrives loudly, obviously, with warning signs impossible to miss. But Steven knew better. Danger often looks boring. It looks like someone slowing their walk. It looks like a pause that lasts half a second too long. It looks like confidence turning into entitlement. On this night, nothing seemed out of place, yet. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, glancing down the street as if expecting someone. Her expression was neutral, patient. If anyone had asked her how she felt, she would have said she was fine. And she was, mostly. Normal doesn't mean perfect. It just means familiar. A man passed by her and kept walking. Then he slowed. Steven noticed the change instantly, even though most wouldn't have. The man's pace dropped, not naturally, but deliberately. His shoulders angled just slightly toward her as he moved past. His head turned, eyes scanning in a way that wasn't curious, it was assessing. Steven's gaze followed him, calm but alert. Still, nothing had happened. The man stopped several steps ahead, pretended to check something, then turned around. To anyone else, it might have looked harmless. People stop and turn around all the time. Cities are full of small, meaningless movements. But Steven recognized the pattern. Not from fear, but from experience. He stayed where he was. He didn't step in. He didn't call out. He didn't signal anything. Because intervening too early can escalate a situation just as much as intervening too late. This was still the normal world. Still the calm before anything crossed a line. And as the man began to drift back toward her, closing the space between them slowly, Steven made one quiet decision. He would watch. He would wait. And if the moment came, he would act without hesitation. Explanation: why this matters. Most confrontations don't start with violence. They start with people assuming someone else will step in. The man didn't approach all at once. He drifted closer in stages, as if testing the space between them, measuring how much of it he could claim without resistance. To anyone glancing over, it looked accidental, just another pedestrian slowing down, adjusting direction, finding his way through the crowd. But to her, the intent was clear. He was circling. She felt it before she fully understood it. The subtle tightening in her chest. The instinctive awareness that someone had entered her personal space without permission. She took a small step sideways, pretending to check her phone again, hoping the message would be clear. It wasn't. The man smiled, but there was nothing friendly about it. His eyes lingered in a way that stripped away comfort, replacing it with unease. He leaned slightly closer, enough that she could hear his voice over the noise of the street. The words were quiet, calculated, designed so that no one else would notice. Whatever he said wasn't a compliment. It wasn't even an attempt at conversation. It was a probe, meant to see whether she would stay silent or push back. Meant to test how much he could get away with in a public place where everyone assumes safety is guaranteed. She shifted again, increasing the distance between them. "Please," she said, her voice controlled but firm. One word. Clear. Enough to draw a boundary without escalating the situation. The man chuckled. Not loudly, just enough to let her know he'd heard her and dismissed it. He took another step forward, closing the gap she had created. His confidence grew with each second that passed without consequences. A few steps away, Steven Seagal watched the exchange unfold. He saw the changes others missed, the way her shoulders angled away, the way her free hand clenched slightly, the way the man's posture relaxed as if he'd already decided the outcome. Steven's expression didn't change, but his attention sharpened. This was no longer casual. The man spoke again, louder this time. Not loud enough to cause a scene, but loud enough to be unmistakably heard by her. A remark meant to embarrass, to assert control, to remind her that he felt untouchable. She looked around. People were there. Dozens of them. But no one met her eyes. Some were distracted. Some pretended not to notice. Others noticed and chose discomfort over involvement. Steven felt a familiar weight settle in his chest. Not anger, but clarity. The man's hand moved. Not aggressively. Not yet. Just a reach, slow and deliberate, as if he were daring someone to stop him. As if the absence of resistance had already convinced him that no one would. That was the moment the situation crossed from uncomfortable to unacceptable. Steven stepped forward. Still calm. Still controlled. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. His movement was deliberate enough to be noticed, quiet enough not to cause panic. He placed himself between them, not touching, not threatening, just enough to break the man's focus. "Step back," Steven said. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. There was something in his tone that cut through the noise of the street, something steady and unyielding. The man blinked, surprised. "Who are you?" he asked, irritation flashing across his face. Steven didn't answer the question. He didn't owe him an explanation. "I said step back." The man laughed, but it sounded forced. He glanced around, suddenly aware of the eyes that had begun to turn toward them. His pride flared, fighting the doubt creeping in. "She's not with you," he said, attempting to reclaim control. "Mind your business." Steven's gaze didn't waver. "She doesn't want to talk to you," he replied evenly. "That's enough." For a brief second, the man hesitated. This was the fork in the road. The moment where most situations either end quietly or explode. He could have walked away. He could have saved face. He could have chosen the easy exit. Instead, he chose ego. He stepped closer, invading Steven's space, his chest puffed out in challenge. His hand pushed against Steven's shoulder, not hard, but deliberately. Gasps rippled through the nearby crowd. Steven took one step back, not in retreat, but in positioning. Just enough to ensure she was safely behind him. Just enough to reset the distance. The street fell into an uneasy silence. The man smirked, mistaking restraint for weakness. "That's what I thought," he said. Steven looked at him calmly, his voice low but unmistakable. "You should walk away. Right now." The warning wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional. It was factual. The man raised his hand again. And in that instant, everything changed. Engagement question. Have you ever seen someone push a situation too far, mistaking silence for permission? Explanation. Why this moment matters. Most threats don't come from sudden violence. They come from people who believe no one will stop them. For Steven, time seemed to slow, not because of fear, but because of focus. The man's raised hand hovered in the air, suspended between intention and consequence. To most people, this would have been the moment of panic, the moment when adrenaline takes over and instinct replaces thought. But Steven had spent decades training himself for the opposite response. Calm first. Clarity second. Action last. He was fully aware of what he could do in the next few seconds. The knowledge sat heavy in his mind, not as temptation, but as responsibility. Years of martial arts training had carved certain reactions into his muscles, responses that could end a threat instantly. But Steven also knew something else. Power without restraint creates more damage than danger itself. This wasn't a tournament. This wasn't a movie set. This was a public street, full of unpredictable variables. A wrong move could injure someone unnecessarily. It could escalate the situation. It could turn protection into chaos. Behind him, he could sense her presence. He didn't need to look to know she was there. The slight shift of her breath, the tension in the air. His awareness extended beyond the man in front of him. Protecting her meant more than stopping an attack. It meant preventing panic, preventing fear from spreading, preventing the situation from becoming something it didn't need to be. Steven spoke again, slower this time. "You don't want to do this." His words weren't a threat. They were an invitation, to step back, to reconsider, to choose dignity over pride. The man sneered, misreading the tone completely. "Oh yeah," he said. "Make me." There it was. Not the shove. Not the raised hand. But the challenge. Steven felt the familiar tension of decision, the quiet crossroads every trained fighter knows. The point where patience ends and action begins. He had waited long enough to be certain. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't misunderstanding. This was intent. In Steven's mind, the options aligned with stark clarity. One path led to control. The other led to unnecessary harm. The difference between them was discipline. He adjusted his stance slightly. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to anchor his balance, to position his body between the man and the woman behind him. His hands remained relaxed at his sides, fingers loose, posture neutral. To the untrained eye, he still looked passive. To the man in front of him, that passivity looked like weakness. The man stepped in again, his voice rising, his movements becoming sharper, less controlled. Anger had replaced confidence now, fueled by the presence of witnesses and the pressure to save face. Steven noticed everything. The weight shifting onto the man's front foot. The tension in his shoulders. The impatience in his breathing. These details mattered. They told a story more honest than words ever could. This wasn't about her anymore. This was about ego. Steven made his choice. Not in anger. Not in pride. But in responsibility. He took a single breath, deep and steady, grounding himself in the moment. The noise of the city faded into the background. The crowd, the lights, the passing cars, all of it became irrelevant. There was only timing. There was only control. Steven's goal was simple: end the threat without creating a new one. He didn't need to hurt the man to stop him. He didn't need to prove anything. The true test wasn't whether he could dominate, it was whether he could restrain himself while doing so. The man lunged forward, driven by frustration rather than strategy. His movement was sloppy, fueled by emotion rather than thought. Steven saw the opening instantly. But he didn't take it yet. He waited a fraction of a second longer, long enough to be absolutely certain that there was no turning back. That the line had been crossed beyond doubt. That action was no longer optional, but necessary. This pause, this razor-thin moment, was the essence of mastery. Most people act too soon, guided by impulse. Others act too late, frozen by fear. Steven acted exactly when he needed to. As the man's balance shifted and his center of gravity moved forward, Steven prepared to move, not explosively, not violently, but decisively. What came next wouldn't look dramatic. There would be no wild swings. No chaos. Just precision. Just discipline. Just a controlled response to an uncontrolled threat. And in that moment, Steven wasn't thinking about reputation, or strength, or even victory. He was thinking about one thing only. Ending this safely. Explanation. Psychology. True strength isn't the ability to cause harm. It's the discipline to choose the smallest amount of force necessary. Engagement question. Do you think real courage is acting fast, or knowing exactly when to act? The street had grown quiet. Not silent, exactly, but the usual hum of traffic and distant chatter seemed muted now, replaced by the tension that had settled between the three of them. Bystanders noticed, even if only subconsciously, the way people slowed their steps, the way heads turned, the subtle tightening of shoulders. Something was happening, something that made ordinary movement feel fragile, like glass about to shatter. The man, confident a moment ago, had lost a thread of composure. His ego, inflamed by the attention of witnesses, began pushing him toward reckless behavior. "Did I offend you, old man?" he spat, stepping closer, invading Steven's space with deliberate aggression. His hand twitched as if to shove or grab again. His chest heaved slightly, eyes flashing with a mixture of pride and frustration. Steven didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. His calm demeanor was unnerving. It carried a quiet authority that the man, in his arrogance, wasn't prepared for. "Step away," Steven said evenly. "Apologize. And this ends." The words weren't loud, but they landed with precision, slicing through the tension like a blade. For a split second, doubt flickered across the man's face, a hesitation almost invisible to the untrained eye. But pride, that stubborn companion, crushed it instantly. The man leaned in, pushing Steven's shoulder lightly. It wasn't a full-on assault, yet, but the message was clear. He intended to escalate. Gasps rippled through the few witnesses who had stopped to watch. Phones appeared in hands as people instinctively prepared to record the unfolding moment. Conversations ceased. Even a passing delivery driver slowed, sensing the shift in energy. Steven's body shifted slightly, not in fear, not in retreat, but strategically. One subtle step back positioned himself between the woman and the threat, shielding her without aggression. His eyes remained locked on the man, calm, measuring, anticipating. The man raised his hand again, a little faster this time, a little more aggressively. The tension escalated. People nearby began leaning forward, drawn in by the silent spectacle. Some whispered to each other. Some held their phones in hesitant anticipation. It was the kind of moment that could spiral out of control in an instant. Steven didn't react impulsively. Every micro-movement was calculated. Years of training, of reading subtle shifts in body language, informed his actions. He noticed the man's weight slightly forward, the angle of his arm, the way his momentum was now unstable. Then came the moment of truth. The man lunged, thinking that speed and aggression would catch Steven off guard. But experience is not easily fooled. With a single smooth motion, Steven redirected the man's arm, using his momentum against him. The shove that was meant to intimidate became his undoing. The man stumbled, regaining balance awkwardly, but not violently enough to cause real harm. People gasped. Some instinctively moved back. Phones recorded, but the spectacle wasn't of a fight, it was of control. Steven didn't pursue. He didn't chase. There was no yelling, no threat. He simply stepped forward, closing the minimal distance necessary to reinforce the boundary, and said quietly, "You don't need to be hurt to be stopped. You just need to be out of control." The words carried weight because they were lived. The lesson was visible in the measured precision of his movements, in the absence of anger, in the calm authority that now dominated the street. The man's face changed. Shock. Confusion. Frustration. For the first time, he realized he was not in charge. The witnesses could sense the shift. The balance of power was no longer with the aggressor, it was with the one who remained unshakable. The crowd began to exhale subtly, as if the tension that had coiled around the street was finally loosening. Yet no one clapped. No one cheered. There was only recognition of what they had just witnessed. Power wielded without rage, authority demonstrated without harm. Steven's focus never left the man until he had been nudged back far enough to prevent further escalation. Every motion was precise, deliberate, and controlled. The woman he protected stayed close behind, her tension easing under his calm presence. Finally, the man's pride, bruised and deflated, forced him to retreat. He stepped back, muttering something under his breath, signaling defeat without violence. His friends, who had been lingering at a distance, pulled him away. The street resumed its normal rhythm, but the invisible lesson remained. Strength is measured not by the ability to attack, but by the capacity to control. Engagement question. If you had been standing there, watching someone escalate like that, would you have intervened, or would you have stayed silent? Explanation. Lesson. Most confrontations don't require brute force. They require timing, perception, and control. Anger looks powerful, but discipline is what actually ends a situation without creating more danger. In that moment, Steven demonstrated the rare skill of restraint. The kind of mastery few possess, the ability to stop a threat, protect someone, and maintain calm authority all at once. It's a lesson in power, but also in humanity. The street went back to normal eventually. People continued on their way. But the imprint of what had happened lingered, even on those who hadn't been directly involved. Witnessing restraint in the face of aggression leaves a mark that chaos never could. If you had been standing there, watching someone escalate like that, would you have intervened, or would you have stayed silent? The street had held its breath. For a few tense moments, it seemed as if the world itself had slowed, waiting to see what would happen next. The man's ego, once loud and confident, was now cracking under the quiet force that Steven Seagal radiated. He still didn't fully understand who he was dealing with, and that ignorance was about to become painfully obvious. Steven's eyes never left him. Calm. Focused. Unshaken. Every subtle muscle movement, every shift in weight was precise, intentional. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to threaten. His presence alone carried authority. "Walk away," Steven said again, low, steady. Not angry. Not commanding. Just stating a fact. The man hesitated, then sneered, trying to laugh it off. "Or what?" he spat, raising his hand again in an impulsive motion fueled by pride. For a moment, there was tension that could have exploded into chaos. Bystanders unconsciously stepped back, sensing the danger. Some raised their phones. Others froze, unsure whether to intervene. But Steven didn't panic. He didn't react out of fear or ego. He waited, watching the man commit to his own aggression. And when the motion came, fast, uncontrolled, overconfident, Steven acted. Not with rage. Not with chaos. Not with a single ounce of wasted energy. He shifted his weight slightly, just enough to meet the man's momentum. With a motion that was smooth, deliberate, and almost invisible, he redirected the man's hand, guiding it past himself harmlessly while simultaneously destabilizing the aggressor's balance. The man stumbled, barely regaining his footing, eyes wide with shock. He hadn't expected resistance like this. He hadn't expected control, precision, mastery. "You don't need to be hurt to be stopped," Steven said quietly, as if reiterating the lesson he had lived countless times. "You just need to be out of control." The words carried weight not because of volume, but because of truth. Every observer could feel it in the stillness that followed. Every witness could see it in the way the aggressor had gone from dominance to uncertainty in less than a heartbeat. The man attempted another aggressive move, this time a shove, but Steven anticipated it instantly. He intercepted without effort, using the man's own momentum to redirect him again. His movements were economical, precise, and non-violent. The street was no longer a battleground. It was a stage, showcasing the rare combination of skill, patience, and restraint. Bystanders began to sense the shift. The man's confidence faltered completely. His ego, the same force that had pushed him forward initially, now worked against him. He stepped back, unsure how to regain his dominance. His friends, standing nearby, exchanged worried glances, unsure how to intervene without escalating further. Steven remained calm. He didn't advance. He didn't raise his voice. He simply maintained his stance, his eyes locked on the man, a living demonstration of authority without aggression. "You still have time," Steven said quietly, but with unmistakable clarity. "Walk away while you can." The man hesitated. His pride argued against it. His desire to dominate was still there, but he felt something he had never expected. Fear, not of pain, but of the unshakable control in front of him. He realized he was outmatched in a way he couldn't see, but could feel. For the first time, the spectators understood. This was not about strength measured in fists or volume. This was strength measured in discipline, timing, and perception. The man made one final attempt, but it was sloppy, uncoordinated, desperate. Steven met it effortlessly, redirecting, stabilizing, and neutralizing the movement without striking a single blow. The aggressor stumbled, balance gone, and for the first time in the entire encounter, he acknowledged defeat, not to Steven's words, but to Steven's presence, his control, his mastery. The street exhaled collectively, though no one spoke. No cheers erupted. No one clapped. The bystanders were stunned, aware that they had witnessed something rare, power wielded with restraint. Steven looked down at the woman behind him, making sure she was safe. She was tense, shaken, but unharmed. Her eyes met his, a quiet acknowledgement passing between them. She understood what had just occurred, protection that relied on mastery, not force, strength that preserved dignity rather than destroying it. The man's friends finally intervened, pulling him away. His pride was bruised, his arrogance dissolved, his ego quieted without a single punch landed. He walked off, confused and humbled, leaving the street to return to its ordinary rhythm. Steven didn't chase him, didn't threaten, didn't gloat. He simply stood there, calm, breathing steadily, the embodiment of authority without chaos. Explanation, lesson. Violence is easy. Control is rare. The moment of mastery is not when one strikes, but when one stops a threat without creating new harm. Anger looks powerful, but restraint carries the true weight of authority. Engagement question. If you had been watching this in real life, would you have recognized the difference between strength and control? Could you stay calm in the face of someone trying to provoke you, or protect someone else, without letting ego take over? In that moment, Steven Seagal demonstrated a truth that is almost never visible in everyday life. The strongest person in the room is not the one who shouts or strikes first. It's the one who maintains control, observes, and acts decisively at exactly the right moment. And the lesson spread, unspoken, yet unmistakable, through every witness, every recording, and every mind that processed what had happened. The man's friends finally pulled him away, dragging him down the street, muttering under his breath. His ego was bruised, his confidence shattered, but not a single physical blow had been struck. The street slowly began to breathe again, the tension melting back into the usual rhythm of cars, footsteps, and distant music. To the casual observer, it might have looked like nothing had happened. But everyone who had been paying attention knew better. Steven Seagal turned to the woman behind him. She was still tense, her body rigid with lingering fear, but safe. He offered a quiet, reassuring smile. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. She nodded, her voice catching slightly as she replied, "Yes, thanks to you." It wasn't gratitude for fighting. It wasn't relief at a punch thrown or an arm twisted. It was gratitude for the control, the awareness, the protection that didn't rely on rage or chaos. That was what had kept her safe. That was what had ended the threat without escalating it into something far worse. The few bystanders who had been watching began to murmur, exchanging glances. Some recorded the last moments on their phones, not for entertainment, but because they understood the lesson unfolding in real time. The lesson wasn't flashy. It wasn't violent. It was subtle, yet powerful. Restraint is strength. Discipline is authority. Control is mastery. No one cheered. No one celebrated. And yet, the impact of what had happened lingered far longer than any punch ever could. Those who witnessed it understood something rare. The strongest person in a room is not the loudest, the fastest, or the most aggressive. It is the one who protects without losing control, who asserts boundaries without creating unnecessary harm. Steven didn't linger for recognition. He didn't bask in the attention of witnesses or recordings. He simply walked with her, maintaining calm composure, letting the city return to normal around them. The threat had been neutralized, the danger removed, and life continued, only now with a quiet lesson imprinted on everyone who had seen it. By the next morning, the video began circulating online. People shared it, not for shock or drama, but for the lesson it carried. It wasn't about who could hit the hardest. It was about who could stop a situation from escalating while maintaining dignity, control, and awareness. Comments poured in, with people reflecting on what they would have done in the same moment. Many admitted that they would have panicked, or stepped away, or reacted poorly. Others acknowledged the rare mastery on display and the subtle art of stopping danger without creating more. The story became viral not because of violence, but because of restraint. Not because of ego, but because of clarity. Not because of fear, but because of courage, the kind of courage that comes from knowing how to act decisively, thoughtfully, and without unnecessary force. Steven turned back to the woman once more before they parted ways. There was no dramatics, no final showdown, just a shared understanding. Protection doesn't need to be loud. Authority doesn't need to be violent. Strength isn't about showing off, it's about keeping others safe while maintaining one's own discipline. Final engagement. Comment driver. The strongest person in the room isn't always obvious. Sometimes, they are the quiet presence that ends a threat without raising a hand. If you believe real strength comes from discipline, not rage, type respect in the comments. Would you have had the courage to step in and protect someone in that moment? Or would you have let fear or uncertainty guide your actions? This encounter left an invisible mark, not on the street, not on the witnesses, but on the understanding of what true mastery looks like. Strength without control can be destructive. Control without courage is useless. But when courage meets discipline, the results are undeniable. The video, shared thousands of times, sparked discussion and reflection. It reminded people that being strong isn't about intimidation. It's about awareness. It's about timing. It's about restraint. And it's about protecting those who cannot defend themselves while maintaining your own calm, your own authority, and your own sense of responsibility. By the end of the day, the lesson had traveled farther than the threat ever could have. People didn't remember a fight. They remembered a master at work, a man who chose control over chaos, discipline over anger, and protection over ego. And in that lesson lies the reason why the story was shared again and again, inspiring a quiet respect in everyone who watched.